Top of the morning to you and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Russia launches airstrikes on Odesa for a second night in a row. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says every possible option being discussed over grain deal alternative, plus African Union expresses regret over Russia's grain deal exit. Thank you so much for joining us. Russia launched an attack on Odesa again early today. This is the second time in a row the southern port city is being targeted. Spokesperson Serhiy Brachuk says more caliber, that is cruise missile launches, have been documented from the Black Sea, but Ukraine's air defenses were repelling a Russian attack on Telegram. Other witnesses saw a sustained barrage from the air defense near the direction of the port. The team also heard at least 3 large bangs. Head of the Odesa region's military administration, Ole Kipper, urged people not to come close to windows. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is indicating that every possible option is on the table as an alternative to the Black Sea grain deal for discussions. The Black Sea deal was brokered by the UN and Turkey in July last year to combat a global food crisis worsened by Russia's February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Russia's withdrawal on Monday, July the 17th, which included revoking its guarantees for safe navigation, also ended a pact between the United Nations and Moscow, in which UN officials agreed to help Russian food and fertilizer exports reach world markets. Kuleba said the focus on reviving the Black Sea shipment was either to continue within the existing framework or with the creation of a new model.
Of our soldiers. If there is political will to ensure supply of Ukrainian cereals to global market, there must be a way to do that. And if Russia withdrew from the initiative, then Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations, or any other country or countries of the world could come up with their initiative, either to continue within the existing framework or to create a new model of deliveries. These discussions are literally about every possible option. Yesterday, when I had a meeting with the Secretary General ahead of his phone conversation with President Zelensky, we literally discussed all possible options with him, and he instructed relevant departments of the Secretariat to consider possible viable options. So less than 48 hours since Russia withdrew from the grain initiative, we are literally still looking into every possible option. We're doing it in Kiev. Our partners are doing it in Brussels, in Washington, here at the headquarters, in Ankara. Everyone is looking for the way out, and every option is on the table now. The problem, of course, is what is going to happen if Russia decides to attack a vessel carrying grain. This is the issue that is being considered now in different capitals and here in the headquarters. But what is clear is that things cannot remain as they are. We cannot just say, okay, Black Sea Grain Initiative is dead, Russia killed it, and now we have to sit and see how it evolves. We have to find an alternative.
Meanwhile, in agreement with Mr. Kuleba's statement, the United Nations says there are a number of ideas being floated around to help get Ukrainian and Russian grain and fertilizer to global markets after Moscow quit the deal, allowing for the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric did not give any details.
5 and 7. The Secretary General will continue to explore all possible avenues to ensure that Ukrainian grain, Russian grain, and Russian fertilizer are out into the global market. That is a determination of his. There are a number of ideas being floated. I think also questions need to be asked of ship operators and others. I mean, it's been very clear in the letter sent to us by the Russian Federation that they've removed the safety security guarantees to the Black Sea grain corridor. So those issues were brought up in the phone call and in the conversation.
Elsewhere, Polish Agriculture Minister Robert Telus is unhappy that, in his words, Russia is using grain as ammunition. He urged the European Union to help improve grain logistics as more Ukrainian shipments will start flowing through borders after the harvest. Farmers in Poland and other nations bordering Ukraine came under pressure from Ukrainian grain this year, pushing Warsaw to close its border for imports. As a result, Brussels agreed to halt imports of Ukrainian grain through the borders of Ukraine's neighbors, allowing only shipments in transit. Toulouse has given assurance that Warsaw stands ready to improve the transit of grain through its border, but said the flow will not increase immediately. Mr. Toulouse, who will meet his counterparts from Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, and Moldova today, says Warsaw will push for an extension of the embargo on Ukrainian grain imports beyond September the 15th. Russia struck Ukrainian ports on Tuesday, a day after pulling out of the UN-backed deal to let Kyiv export grain. It also hit fuel storage in Odesa and a plant making seaborne drones there as part of mass revenge strikes in retaliation for attacks by Ukraine that knocked out its road bridge to the occupied Crimean peninsula. Moscow says if demands to improve exports of its own grain and fertilizer are met, it will consider resurrecting the Black Sea grain agreement. However, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that a UN pact that aimed to help facilitate Russia's shipments over the past year is also terminated. Founding partner of the agmarket.net, Jim McCormick, analyzes the situation.
Ukraine is expected to make up to 10% of the world corn exports and roughly 5% of the world's wheat exports in this upcoming year, and the market reacted to that relatively bullishly to begin with. But the reality is right here at the moment, the old crop corn season, they're done shipping corn near term. So, we're not shipping a lot of corn out of Ukraine, and they're getting ready for that new fall harvest here in a few months. So it's not going to be a huge impact. Wheat did have an initial impact on the wheat market, but the reality is Russia has such a huge wheat crop at the moment. There really isn't quite the shortage in the world at the moment at this point. I'm not as bullish like this is a drastic catastrophe of them shutting down this facility at the moment, because there are other suppliers in the world at the moment. And the world has figured out how to supply without the Ukrainian access. Other countries are ramped up for their production, per se. You got a monster corn crop coming out of Brazil that would allow the Chinese, instead of maybe buy Ukrainian corn, can buy the Brazilian corn. But the fact of the matter is, whenever you take a supply off the market is usually going to rebalance itself at a little bit more higher price to make up for that shortfall. And that is a concern. The grain that gets shipped out of the Ukraine, about half of it is going out of those Black Sea ports. The other half is either being railed out, or it's going out and then coming back in through the Donbas River, I believe it is.
The U.S. will announce a new pledge to buy $1.3 billion worth of military aid for Kyiv in the coming days. That's according to two U.S. officials who prefer to remain anonymous. The weapons package is expected to include air defenses, counter-drone systems, exploding drones and ammunition. Additionally, Ukraine will get many counter-drone systems made by Australia's Drone Shield Limited, alongside radar, sensors, and analysis systems. Washington uses funds in its Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative program, allowing President Joe Biden's administration to buy weapons from industry rather than pull from stocks. In the 2023 fiscal year, from October the 1st, 2022 to September the 30th, 2023, the Pentagon has provided more than $10.8 billion in security assistance for Ukraine under the program. Now let's speak to a security expert, Mr. Chidi Onwenu, who is joining us virtually from London in the UK. Good morning. Thank you for joining us and welcome.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Russia didn't mince any words, did they, in their attack on Odesa, calling it a revenge strike, retaliatory measures for Ukraine's attack on the bridge to Crimea. So that's the one thing. Then the other thing is the Black Sea grain deal expiration. Obviously, both are connected. Can you give us your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, the strikes on Odesa would have been planned a while ago and most likely just kept on the shelf, ready to go for now. There are many reasons why the Russians would choose to strike Odesa now. I believe that, this was a pre-planned operation. The Russians have been signaling for quite a while that they were not happy with how the grain deal was going, or that they were going to pull out. So I believe that most likely what's happened now is just a continuation of that plan. They had already planned to attack Odesa, and it was kind of convenient for them that the Ukrainians at the same time had most likely had a pre-planned operation to attack the Kerch Bridge, so it all kind of falls into one. This is part of the kind of geopolitical strategic game that's being played out, on the sidelines, or as adjuncts to the war as it's going on now, where they're putting pressure on global markets, on global partners, to try and get concessions for each other. The Russians would want to put pressure on the UN and other non-aligned countries, as well as Ukraine's allies, to get additional concessions, even though, out of the grain deal, they've done quite well, just in order to put pressure on Ukraine. And the Ukrainians, again, will want to exploit this grain deal to try and limit Russia's access to the market as much as it can. So it's a kind of a macabre dance taking place, and both sides are kind of going for maximalist objectives. And as usual, it will be, other people who will have to bear the consequences.
So do you think that because President Putin, it seems to be a sore point to just stay with that particular instant for a second, that bridge was attacked? It was a sore point. It says that bridge will be ready back on stream and repaired by November. He says that the Ukrainians, that bridge was not used as a supply route for now, that it's not being used to supply arms or as a an arms supply route, which the Ukrainians say was possibly the reason why they struck that particular bridge. So it seems to be something that hit them where it hurt.
Yes, so I mean, there's again, with everything in Russia and Ukraine, there's so many layers to it. So if we take Putin's statements in the first place that bridge is not being used as a supply route, first and foremost, that's not true. There is more than enough evidence, of that bridge being used to supply not just actual war materials like tanks, trucks, ammunition, etc., but fuel and water and food and the other kind of supplies that are needed, not just for the military, but also for the Russian civil administration. But even if he says it's not being used as a logistics route, that would be an admission from the Russians that the Ukrainians were successful in their last attack in denying that route to the Russians. So it's a curious statement, and it's very typical of how the Russians, do their information management, in that they put out multiple contradictory statements that on the face do not really make sense, but they're mainly just designed to fill the airwaves with so many different contradictory stories that doesn't really make sense. So you will find also accounts coming from Russian sources saying that the bridge is unaffected, military traffic is running. At the same time, you'll see accounts saying it was never used for military traffic. It's not a legitimate target. The key element of this is that it is a military target. It's simply a bridge, especially a bridge connecting Russia and Crimea, is a clear military target. The rail bridge is used for fuel, for tanks, for all kind of freight. The road bridge again is used for military trucks, etc. And also by severing that, you're creating again problems and dilemmas for the Russians in that they now need to provide more security for it, not just air security to stop it from being, air defense to stop it from being hit from the air, but sea defense. They need to dedicate to radars, to scanning not just the sea but the air, the land, everything. It creates a lot of problems for them because this is a big symbolic strategic target that they can't keep having repeatedly hit, over and over again. But again, the contradiction again comes in that Russia, we are now seeing, I think, the second or third attack on Moscow. Again, these attacks haven't been necessarily successful or effective, but we're seeing attacks on Moscow. We're seeing attacks daily on Belgorod, Rostov, Kursk, things that were completely unimaginable a year ago. This is, again, the Russian contradiction, where things that we consider to be unimaginable happen routinely, and it's just now becomes, a byline. So I think that the conclusion one will get is that the Kerch Bridge is a key target for the Ukraine. It's not just strategically, but operationally. And they have demonstrated twice that they can hit the bridge. They will almost inevitably hit it again. And whatever the Russians say or claim, if that bridge is taken out of operation for military logistics, it will cause them a problem.
The Black Sea grain deal has expired and alternatives are being sought by Ukraine. The Ukrainian president has said that he's looking at alternatives that will make Russia's position negligible in that respect. A naval blockade or armada from the U.S. is out of the question, according to the U.S. And could you speak to the point that using land travel or using road networks, they say that that's too minute a contribution to be able to compete with the large number of goods that can be exported via sea. But do you see any alternative to this sea export route that will be viable enough to make good enough of an impact?
It's unlikely that there will be alternative routes that are viable. So, as you'll be well aware, using sea transport, that's the biggest volume and the biggest vehicle, going, the cheapest way. That's the most efficient way to get these cargoes from one place to another. If you're going to use land routes, you're essentially using land routes to take all of this grain from Ukraine to ports somewhere in Europe to be exported. The land routes of communication are not just dedicated to grain. They also have military purposes. There's also other freight. There's civilians, and there's not enough trucks in the world to take it out in the quantity and in the time that's needed. So it is a fairly inefficient way of transporting these materials. Now there are alternative routes. There are barges that go on the rivers. There's trains. There's other ways of doing it, but nothing is as efficient to export in the quantities that Ukraine, is used to exporting as the sea route. Now, there is nothing to say that, with the wonders of technology and innovation, that these routes can't be made more efficient. But there's a secondary problem in that other countries in Eastern Europe, which are all agricultural nations, are not happy with Ukrainian grain flooding into their markets. So although this grain is meant to be for export outside of Europe, it's actually coming into the domestic markets and depressing prices for local farmers, causing a lot of problems. Because the interesting thing is that the realities of life do not stop because of the war. Everybody has to make a living. And irrespective, and as much as Ukraine, has to make, is trying to support its economy by exporting its grain, it's creating, problems for local farmers in Poland and Romania and all of these places. And irrespective of their support for Ukraine, that's not acceptable to them. Everybody, has to make a living. So this is why I'm saying the Russian, pressure on the Black Sea deal is not just because, as they say, they're not getting what they want. It's because they know it creates these frictions. They know it creates these problems. They know it creates, as I keep harping on, it creates dilemmas for their opposition. So it's an intelligent strategic move for them, but it also creates problems for them because they need to export their grain as well. And in terms of what's been muted about, the US coming in. That's never going to happen. The US Navy could very easily go into the Black Sea, clear it, but that's essentially they're going to have to destroy the Russian Navy, which again they can do quite easily, but that will be a world war, and nobody wants that. The only power that has the capability to do this are the Turks. They have a very powerful navy. The Black Sea is their backdoor. They control the entrance and exit of ships into the Black Sea. And they've also shown that they have the will to take on the Russians, both militarily and diplomatically. The question is, do they really want this or not? And that's, again, Erdogan is another wild card in the pack. It's very unlikely they would go toe-to-toe, but it would be interesting if they did.
Obviously, Turkey is playing a mediatory role in this. It's been said that they're waiting for intervention by the Turkish President Erdogan on this expiration of the deal. Do you think it could have been better negotiated, renegotiated, so it didn't expire by the United Nations?
I mean, I don't know the details of the negotiation or the particulars, but I think it's been telegraphed by the Russians quite clearly that they were not going to renew this, and I think they were looking for some quite heavy concessions. I believe even if they'd got those concessions, they would have most likely terminated the deal, maybe for a few days or not, just to make the point. What we don't know now is, following the Kerch Bridge strike and, all the other things that are happening in the background, whether they're going to keep this off for a long period. But I suspect it's in everyone's interest for this deal to go ahead. So I think the Russians will weigh up, the cost benefits of it. And once they've extracted as much concessions as they can, I would suspect they would reinstate it.
This is what Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, was trying to avoid on his African peace mission visit to Ukraine and to Moscow. And that was the Black Sea grain deal not expiring. And his critics went to town and said that it was not a good thing the way he went about it with the other African leaders that did go. But they did make an attempt, and the jury is still out on whether or not that was unsuccessful. But for nations like Brazil, and I want you to talk about the South American nations now, if you can, many of them have been eerily quiet, apart from Brazil and maybe Cuba, who seem to support Russia. The other South African countries, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, what do you think of what they can bring to the table as far as influencing Russia and Ukraine, or if they can't do anything at all?
Well, the South American nations are quiet because, everybody is gaining from this. Once the Ukrainian grain is off the market, that means South American grain is on the market. Once Ukrainian grain is off the market, the price of grain goes up. Everybody's profiting. So the secondary effect of the war is that while this war is going on in Russia, the Russian market is locked out. There are all other countries around the world who are benefiting from it. You can say the same about Central Asia, be it Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, they're all benefiting greatly from sanctions being on Russia. So there's many interesting analysis of, importation of cars, exportation of fuel, exportation of certain types of metals that have suddenly skyrocketed, in certain countries that weren't doing it before. And that's all sanctions busting, around the Russian war. This is a great business opportunity for anybody who is in any way connected to this. So many of the South American countries are agricultural countries, Argentina, Brazil, and they're making a lot of money out of this. They're making a lot of money from selling their grain, from filling the gaps that the Russian and Ukrainian grain is not able to reach. But most of them, politically, are what I would say ideologically left, and look upon the US with a certain amount of suspicion, and thus, by default, anything the US associates itself with, such as Ukraine, they look upon it with great suspicion. This is, in my opinion anyway, not necessarily unjustified. If you are a student of history and you understand the US involvement in South America, it's generally not been nice. So yes, there is a certain amount of reservation there. And you can say clearly it's not fair. The Ukrainians are obviously not the US, but they're just tainted by association. So while there's a bit of tacit sympathy for Russia and a lot of overt sympathy in countries that are very hostile to the United States, like Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, yes, the others are just quietly keeping quiet and making money.
Yes, all countries need to pull together, regardless of what side of the divide they're on, to help bring this conflict to a conclusion. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Mr. Chidi Nwanu, a security expert who joined us from out of London in the UK.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, South Africa asks ICC to exempt it from arresting Russia's President Putin on visit. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the So For More stretch of our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Beneficiaries of food assistance provided by the UN World Food Programme in Yemen are worried that the termination of the Black Sea Grain Initiative could deprive them of the already scant foodstuff they receive. Yemen's humanitarian crisis and food shortages have been made worse by major financial shortfalls, global inflation and access issues, leading to food cost hikes beyond the means of many Yemeni households. Russia's decision to halt participation in the year-old deal that lets Ukraine export grain through the Black Sea has exacerbated the existing problem. World Food Programme Regional Director, Eastern Africa, Michael Dunford, says that the same thing about the region he oversees. In addition to the number of crises in the region, he says the Sudan conflict added a layer of difficulty. The current war in Sudan, which erupted amidst disputes over a planned transition towards civilian rule, has led to the displacement of more than 3 million people, including more than 700,000 who have crossed into neighboring countries.
As the Secretary-General said yesterday, this decision to end the Black Sea Grain Initiative is regrettable. And from where I stand in Eastern Africa, I would say it's very regrettable because, in fact, this is going to make our ability to feed hungry people that much more difficult. Already, there are 80 million people in the region who are acutely food insecure. A whole range of factors are driving that. It's conflict, it's climate, it's the economic shocks, and of course, it's the hangover from COVID. This suspension of the initiative will just exacerbate what is already a terrible situation. WFP is optimistic that at some point, ideally in the near future, this initiative can be back on track. In the meantime, we will need to find alternative sources of wheat and commodities to feed the populations that we serve. The problem with that is that we will need to find more expensive markets. We've never seen the region at such a high risk as it is today. In fact, at the beginning of the year, we were saying that the region was on fire. In light of what's now happening in Sudan and the other factors that are playing out, it feels like the region's actually been doused with petrol and the fire is now out of control. At the moment, I see no signs that in the immediate future, the situation is going to get better. I'm generally an optimist. I look out at what we are facing, and I'm really quite pessimistic. So many conflicting factors driving food insecurity, driving hunger, the ability of people to put food on their tables, people being forced from their homes, we've seen terrible scenes coming out of Sudan recently and West Darfur. The situation really is as bad as I've seen it in a career that spanned over 25 years.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has asked permission from the International Criminal Court, the ICC, not to arrest Russian President Vladimir Putin because to do so will amount to a declaration of war. President Ramaphosa made the remark in a legal response to a court case brought by the opposition Democratic Alliance to compel the government to arrest President Putin should he set foot on South African soil. President Ramaphosa's response, which was filed on June the 27th, was just made public, and South Africa is due to hold a summit. The BRICS Club of Nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa next month in South Africa, which all of the heads of states of those countries are expected and scheduled to attend. But the ICC has an arrest warrant for President Putin, accusing him of the war crime of deporting Ukrainian children to Russia. South Africa, as an ICC member, is obliged to arrest him should he turn up for the summit. We now bring in public affairs analyst Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, who joins us virtually from Lagos here, southwest Nigeria. Thank you for making out the time to be with us.
Having me on your program. Thank you.
In the first place, Russia is not a signatory to the ICC convention. So in the first place, it's not in the purview of the ICC to arrest a Russian official in the first place. In the second place, should President Putin risk the embarrassment of leaving his country and be arrested by the ICC, why would South Africa ask for the ICC to exempt him from the arrest warrant since they are members of the ICC?
Okay, I'll describe this case as a very, very difficult one, and I'll explain why. So the involvement of South Africa in BRICS is to further give them options as to developing their country economically. And I can tell you for a fact that they are also talking to other African countries, including Nigeria, to also join, because the truth of the matter is, the more options we have as a people, the better for us. The idea of strictly doing business with the US and all of that is becoming out of fashion. And so truth is, people are exploring other options. And so I would tell you that on the mind of President Ramaphosa is economy, development of his people, the good of his people. And so he will not, like a situation where President Putin comes to South Africa and because of that, he's arrested. And I guess that's why he's throwing that out, saying, look, he's here to do business with us. Yes, there's a situation on ground which the whole world is not happy about. Nobody likes what he's doing as a person, because, again, one of the things I try to do is to say, yes, Putin might have followers in Russia, but I know that it is not all Russians that is in support of the decision or the action he's taking at this time, invading Ukraine. So I believe what President Ramaphosa is saying, we as a people are hosting this conference, and we're concerned to ensuring that it's a successful one. And we don't want to have any incident that will cause anything that would bring to the table that, oh, we regret going to South Africa to host this event. Again, this is also bringing to the table a situation where the whole world has seen us in Africa as the lesser power. And so things like this can be muted, because it's happening in South Africa. You won't talk about that if, for instance, this is being hosted in China, for instance. So truth of the matter is, I believe that his declaration or plea is a legitimate one, and I think it's one that is coming from somebody who truly believes that his people deserve better as regards, having a better option in doing business and having a better economy in their country.
In the unlikely scenario that President Putin leaves Russia, because I personally don't think he will, but if he did decide to do so, the ICC, Russia is not in the ICC's jurisdiction. So that is why President Ramaphosa is saying that it will be a declaration of war to try to attempt to arrest a sitting president or any kind of president of Russia in another country because of what's going on in Ukraine. Do you think they will dare to do so if President Putin steps out of Russia?
I don't know, because truth of the matter is, the world we live in right now, all sort of funny things happen. And I'm one of those who believe that you're very right to have said that you cannot arrest anyone, any president, any sitting president who obviously have not signed onto your declaration. And incidentally, we've seen cases where America, who is leading this pack, have had cases where they're exempted. And so the truth is, this has not been a fair deal. I'm talking about ICC, because truth of the matter is those who have been arrested, who have been brought to book, who have been questioned, and in some cases jailed, are African leaders. And so I know that the world is cautious. Putin is not just anybody that they can just, clamp on and jump on and arrest. So he's president of Russia, and I'm sure the world do not want to do that, which is the reason why the war has continued to be the way it is. Because, I'm sure you'll agree with me that America, Europe, and the rest of the world have been very, very careful the way they have dealt with Putin, so far. And I know, like you rightly also said, that they probably might come up with all sorts of information out there to confuse all of us. Putin is not likely to come for that meeting, at least not physically. He might join them virtually.
Indeed. Now, what are your thoughts on the expiration of the Black Sea grain deal?
It's unfortunate because, we all know that this is going to cause pain on all of us. The bread we eat and most of the world, the grains and wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia. So it's unfortunate, but I'm happy that the UN have decided to start looking at options. They've said options. They've not tell us specifically the options they're looking at. And without a doubt, the sea was the best option. It was the cheapest. It was the shortest. Whatever option that is going to come is not going to be as good as the Black Sea. Most likely will be more expensive. So it's unfortunate. I only wish that Russia would be magnanimous enough, because truth of the matter is there's a fighting going on, if I don't want to call it a war. And so the fact that they're even allowing it in the first place is magnanimous. But we're just pleading that it will be more magnanimous and continue to allow it so that it will not cause pain, in addition to the plenty things that is happening all over the world. We're going through a lot right now. Everywhere in the world is difficult. Nigeria, my country, we're also going through a whole lot, and things are happening that nobody really wants anything bad to be added to the plenty bad that we have on ground. Please excuse my language.
Majority of the countries around the world are appalled and incensed and upset by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They call it a military operation, but it's just calling it that name so they can do what they want to do militarily against their neighboring country. Having said that, you can be appalled, you can be upset, you can be mad, you can be angry. An injustice can be going on. But is there a responsibility on the part of the negotiators of this Black Sea grain deal to yield to some degree to some of the demands of Russia, who continue to insist that their own food export and fertilizer exports are not being carried through? So they saw no reason to continue with the Black Sea grain deal. Are you satisfied that the United Nations and Turkey and Ukraine did everything they could to extend the deal, or they're just continually upset with Russia and hence the outcome?
Which is, whatever needs to be sacrificed needs to be sacrificed. So I am of the opinion that the negotiators can do better. They can yield more. Truth is, whatever it is you're negotiating, I've always advocated, you must be willing to take more. Because you see, the truth is, you're not negotiating if you're taking a stand and you're insisting on your stand. Negotiation comes into play when at every point in time you go back to the table, you're looking at one thing or the other that you will negotiate, that you will yield, that you will take away, that you'll be willing to give, because that gives your opponent or the person on the other side of the table the feeling that you're truly serious and committed to the negotiation. Because then you can then say, look, each time we come, I take this off, I do that. Why are you not yielding? And you'll be shocked at how much you can get out of your opponent if you're willing to yield. So in every negotiation, no matter how small or big, the rule for me is to continue to look at ways where you can bend at least backward and be able to allow your opponent to see that you're truly committed to the negotiation that you're into. So I believe that they can do better. I believe that they need to try to do better because truth of the matter is Russia is standing in a good stead. They have strength. They have food. They have things to be feared, to be considered, to be respected, to be cautious about. Because it is for that reason that this is still going on, and they're still standing as strong as they have continued to stand. And we've said this already on this program: one life is too many, too much to be allowed to continue to be wasted because we are overly holding on to our side of the negotiation.
Yes, that's exactly. And that's the posture that many of these countries seem to not have, given the way the mediation seems to be off the table now. No one is talking about reconciliation. No one is talking about armistice. No one is talking about ceasefires. No one is talking about treaties. Everyone is talking about the offense that has been committed and how Russia will be pushed back. For the United States and their role in this conflict, what's your impression thus far with the Biden administration and their support for Ukraine and the recent supply of cluster munitions to Ukraine?
Like America has always done, they're police of the world. Truth of the matter is, the more we look into this and examine it, we always see where America themselves have been wrong. Yes, they're the superpower, but if we really examine this and examine it very carefully, over the years, we've always seen that they also would do better than they're doing. They can yield more, they can be more, for instance, speak to Putin more, be willing to show that we are not invisible, because truth is the accusation all over the world, and I'm not just talking about Russia, China, and the rest of the world, is this thing that America feels that the rest of us, and I'm saying the whole world, must just continue to pan to whatever they want and how they want things done. I think it's gotten to a point in the world where they also need to know that being the way things were before, as America, who takes all, wins all, does all, is becoming out of fashion. People are beginning to complain that we cannot continue to trade globally using the US dollar as the global monetary thermometer. That it is high time that they also need to know that things are changing. People are becoming more powerful. People are becoming more cautious. People are asking more questions. People are becoming more suspecting of the things they've done over the years. And it is time for them to also start to take, if not a full step back, but half step back.
Thank you, Mr. Adeyemo. Much appreciated your perspective on the issues. Over 500 days, 510 now days into the war, and it still continues. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, who is a public affairs analyst that joined us from Lagos here in southwest Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
Partial road traffic opened on one lane of the Crimean bridge late on Monday after explosions tore through the road bridge, killing a couple who'd planned to holiday in Crimea and wounding their daughter. Russian media showed traffic jams going in a different direction as tourists tried to drive home through Russian-controlled southern Ukraine, territory that Kiev is fighting to take back. State-run news agency RIA said a tailback of more than 5 kilometers had formed as Russian tourists made for home using the Tonhar Bridge, which was briefly put out of action by a missile attack last month. Moscow blamed the attack on the Crimean bridge, the second since Russia sent its armed forces into Ukraine on Kiev. Ukraine did not officially claim responsibility, but Ukrainian media said Ukrainian security services had deployed maritime drones. After the break, Papal envoy arrives at the White House in the United States to discuss repatriation of Ukrainian children. Please join us again. Welcome back. We're in the final stretch of our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The world of business is affected by this conflict, made even more pertinent now by the expiration of the Black Sea grain deal. Ini John Mekwa, our business correspondent, is with us this morning. Ini, привіт.
Привіт, Olumide.
Привіt. Hello in Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Now, look, the chickens have come home to roost for the Ukrainians. Now, the U.S. says Russia is still making high revenue from grain export.
Yes.
In spite of this, where's the back door they're using?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's one of the things that I was asking myself the first time I saw the question. So let's start from where the U.S. says that Russia is not telling the whole story when they say that they cannot export, because currently about 13% of the grain that's in the world comes from Russia, and that has increased. It used to be about 11%, you know, when they used to share that space with Ukraine, you know, even during the Black Sea grain, but as a grain deal. But now they say it's about 13% because they have found other routes. Now, one of the routes they say is called Leningrad Oblast. Now, it's around Finland, but that area has been declared as a federal subject to Russia. So that means obviously that they will be loyal to Russia. So that's the route that Russia has been using apart from the Black Sea route, you know, which is obviously more known and open to a whole lot of countries, you know. And also talking about the payment, because you also ask, if Russia is asking that their agricultural bank be linked back to SWIFT and that has not been granted, then how are people paying for it? U.S. says that they had approved that J.P. Morgan does business and helps them when it comes to logistics and all of that in the transaction of their grains. And J.P. Morgan has been working with their agricultural bank to ensure that payments are done and some of those logistics are being taken care of. In essence, what Russia is doing is trying to corner the market, the grain market, to itself only, so it doesn't have to share it with Ukraine. That's what the Department of State. That's what the Department of State is saying. You know, that Russia is doing with this pulling out of the grain deal. And even though Ukraine is trying to get, you remember we always talk about how they use the smaller European countries, that's for Ukraine now, you know, to transport a bit, but they don't have the capacity to transport as much as they normally would do. So they're trying to look for other routes also with Turkey. You know, Turkey is also part of those on the Black Sea and all of that. But I mean, unfortunately, Russia has already gotten the routes which they are already using, they've been using for transportation of grain. But Ukraine doesn't have a major route yet, unfortunately, to transport. So at this time, it seems it's the Russian grain that we have, because, you know, both of them are the major grain producers for the world. So when you remove them from it, then it's a major setback for the world, for food security in the world. But now it's just Russia.
It looks like there's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because now Russia says there are no guarantees for the safety of Ukrainian ships, so they can bomb them out of existence.
Exactly, yeah.
And
you know, Russia, you don't want to dare them. You know, they can just do some things to prove to you that they can actually do it. And I don't think that owners of ships and companies that are involved, we want to risk the life and then the livelihood also, you know, to go through. So it's really a big problem for the world, honestly, Olumide. It's a big problem for African countries. It's a big problem for the Asian countries. And we really need this to be resolved.
Let's see how it will unfold. President Erdogan is expected to make some sort of intervention in this aspect. Finally, just tell us in a second about the second edition of the Russia-Africa Summit and the Russia-Africa Economic and Humanitarian Forum for the 27th.
We know that BRICS is holding next month in South Africa. You know, the one that we've been talking about, whether Putin will be arrested, whether he'll be there or not, and all of this. But this is actually Russia looking for closer ties with African countries in the area of economy, energy, and all of that. And, you know, somebody noted when we're talking about it before I came on air this morning to say that, why is it Russia-Africa Summit? Africa is a whole continent. Why? We have United States, US, Africa Summit. Do you understand?
Well,
Africa
obviously, because they're the developed nations.
Yeah,
and,
well, let's develop. Let Africa wake up and get developed, for crying out loud. We are at a very slow pace. You know, sometimes it just belittles the whole continent, you know, that a country, I mean, now Africa is seeking, should we continue our relationship with Russia or not because of the war? Whose side is Africa on? I mean, it's a continent. We can take care of ourselves. Let's wake up and do this thing, you know, and not, you know, be drawn this way or the other. US today, Russia tomorrow, China next tomorrow.
That's the message that should resound around the whole continent. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Please join Ini Domecco for Business Morning after this program. And finally, Italian Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, assigned by Pope Francis, arrived at the White House ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden to discuss repatriating children who Kiev and others say have been deported by Russia. Zuppi and Biden are expected to discuss the suffering caused by the war, humanitarian aid, and other topics. The Kiev government estimates nearly 19,500 children have been taken to Russia or Russian-occupied Crimea since February 2022 in what it condemns as illegal deportation. The International Criminal Court in March issued an arrest warrant for President Putin, accusing him of war crimes of illegally deporting hundreds of children from Ukraine. The Holy See obviously did not disclose how visiting the White House will help to persuade Russia to return those children. That's food for thought as we close today's edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thanks to you, our viewers, our producers, and our guests. Have a good day.